You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. I'm Saul Muerte, the lead host of the podcast sessions here, and Surgeons of Horror, we're back for season 7. Our podcast is dedicated to films both old and new within the horror genre, and we like to dissect and discuss them along the way. I've been wanting to tee this one up for a little while since the passing away of the late great Stuart Gordon, and it felt only right that we should look at a couple of his major films within his career and dissect and discuss them as is our way. So we're going to do 4 of his films. This is kind of what I've decided to do. I know he's done a few others in the mix, but these 4 particularly stood out to me, and that's why I wanted to look at them. We have Re-Animator, we have From Beyond, we have Dolls, and we've got Dagon. And so they're the 4 that we're going to be kind of primarily looking at. And we're going to be kicking things off with Re-Animator, which I have to admit is one of my... it's definitely in one of my... I'd say it's in the top 10 at least. Sometimes it bobs in and out depending on my mood of my all-time favorite horror films. So I'm kind of really keen to talk about this one is my point. But I'm going to need somebody to help me along the way, and joining me on the opposite seat to me here in order to discuss the Re-Animator franchise, because we're going to talk about the other 2 films as well, mainly focus on the first film, but we will kind of chat around the other 2. But joining me to discuss these films will be Richard Lovegrove. Welcome aboard, Richard.
Who's going to believe a talking head get a job in a sideshow? Hello.
I love it. Welcome aboard, Richard. It's good to have you on this one. And do you know, I don't know if we've ever said on our podcast before, but you have an acting background. You work in the business. And for me, when I have a history of watching this in the past, but since I've come to know you, I can so picture you playing the role of Herbert West. It seems like a role that you would pick up and absorb with relish and glee. Am I right? Or
no, absolutely. I'm sure, like most people who see this film, as in if there's one thing they do remember about the film, it's the performance of Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West. I mean, that's definitely the thing that gravitated me towards it. His drive and the sense that you can see behind his eyes just how willing he is to be with fulfilling his objective. And that's the first thing that you study as an actor, your objectives, learning your super objective, like your life goal, and then the goal for that scene or something like that. And his is so very clear, even though a lot of the unknown that is written by a certain 1800s man.
Yes.
It's always leading you to questions, and the way that these stories unfold, you've got so many questions right from the very scene, right from the very couple of lines that you've got. But it would be a fantastic role to play, and there's none other than Jeffrey Combs that plays that so well.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I say that I'm obviously kind of am trumping you a little bit, but Herbert West is. I mean, Jeffrey Combs is Herbert West, I should say. Like through and through. They walk in hand, and I think the key thing, if we kind of dial back slightly, film itself, for those that don't know, was based on HP Lovecraft novella. One of his short ones was called.
Some of these short stories they did for the magazines.
Yeah, that's right. And the way it reads as well, I had read it many moons ago, but I did another kind of quick read before we kind of jumped on board for the podcast record. It's called Herbert West Re-Animator. It's broken into roughly about 6 little kind of mini segments, chapters, if you will. It's interesting because at the beginning of each chapter, there's a little bit of a recap, so you can tell it was written, like you said, for the kind of magazines of the time, to kind of a bit of Pulp Fiction kind of thing going on.
Yeah, having that episodic serial call.
Yeah, definitely. But I will mention it, and I did say how rereading it again, you kind of realize how racist a particular section of the a novella is. It's the third component essentially, in the wording that is used, particularly to those of African American persuasion, and it's indicative of its time. That's not to say that it's kind of acceptable, but like when you read it now, it feels cold and jarring as a response. So yeah, which kind of, and I did a bit of reading around the novella too, and it's not one that's as warmly received as HP Lovecraft's other written material. And I wonder if that's part of that it's kind of gotten a little bit dated, and the style's slightly different as well to the way he writes. And yet that's in itself it juxtaposes the film world, because in the film world and the horror community in particular, it's widely received. So yeah, I just found that kind of interesting take as I was going through stuff.
No, definitely. Well, even from other books, I remember the first HP Lovecraft book that I read was the Necronomicon, and that was a very interesting read. And like most of his stories, keep you wanting more, even from the first, I think, paragraph or sentence from Herbert West's Re-Animator, the first novella. First episode starts in a throwaway comment that like Herbert West has gone missing, like since he's gone missing, blah blah blah.
That's right.
Which was fantastic because it grabbed me and kept me hooked in. But the recapping, certainly gets in your head a bit. But even onto the racism issue, he's definitely got a classist sort of mentality that's prevalent, not even just with using that one word in this, but in, what was it, the Innsmouth case, or I'm not too sure that story.
Yeah, the Innsmouth case. Yeah, that's the one that's the Dagon is based on, the film Dagon. But it has a very large class issue because he's talking about Native Americans at a certain point, and even the way he talks about like ancient royalty and how all the civilization and ape men sort of things like that thrown in there and stuff. So yeah, it's sort of, you get this very classist mentality of where he's saying that they're different from us, whoever they may be. Yeah.
Whether it be of the times, it's still not cool.
Yeah, not cool Lovecraft. You might be kind of widely accepted within the kind of, especially the sci-fi horror community. And for good reason, because he had a vision that is unique, and people kind of responded to it. It's just kind of the language which he uses is where it gets up for debate. So
but even his writing style, because I listened to it as an audiobook, and I found it a lot easier to sort of hear somebody else's inflections on it, because it's a hard read, because it almost to some degrees reads like a manual, like, you know, as in a step-by-step sort of technical sort of diagram, sometimes, not all the time. So even just to keep your sort of grasp on it, it's very hard. But even if we're talking about the original text, Herbert West is regarded as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed man with glasses. And so it's interesting with Jeffrey Combs, but since the performance of Jeffrey Combs, I don't see anyone with blonde hair necessarily pulling that off the same way. I don't know if we would see that character in the same sort of light.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, like, I hate to go there, but even that speaks of, like, Aryan kind of...
Well, that's, exactly, whether or not he was trying to make a statement with that. Because even with the film and the way that Jeffrey Combs plays the character, you have a sense of admiration for what, not necessarily what Herbert West is striving for, but that he is striving so passionately for, with blatant disregard to certain things.
I mean, it's reflective of, like, if we talk about the film, it's very much kind of a big nod to the Universal horror films, you know, the Frankenstein films in particular, and the Frankenstein novel itself, and equally the Hammer horror films. And the common drive with the Frankenstein character is Dr. Frankenstein, I'm talking about, is that kind of insistent drive to perfect his work in reanimation. And you see, I kind of instinctively connect myself with Peter Cushing, his role of Dr. Frankenstein in the Hammer horror films, and that kind of cold maliciousness that he was so good at doing. I mean, people that aren't familiar with the Hammer horror films or Peter Cushing may be more familiar with him in the original Star Wars film. A New Hope, and he's equally cold and malicious in that. And you get a kind of an idea. Yeah, that's it. So you kind of get an idea of how he would have come across, and you can kind of see that in instances of Herbert West and Jeffrey Combs' portrayal of the character in that pursuit of science is first. Science comes before anything else. Everything else is inconsequential, and the pursuit of science is paramount, and that's key. And you see it a bit, and we're going to talk about From Beyond in another podcast, but equally that's the same kind of things going on there, like the pursuit of science in order to kind of achieve its goal is quite profound in that as well.
Interesting as well, even to like looking into the science behind it, and if there is anything from that, because there's many websites that sort of break down the moments in the script, even in the film script, where he mentions any ingredients and things like that, and he seems to I think either in the book or in the film, I'm not too sure, mentions it's from a reptile that. Yes, it's the book is also written. Sorry, we should say in the point of view from someone who was friends with Herbert West, or at least colleagues, and performed some experiments with him to reanimate dead tissue. Which as well was at the time Mary Shelley was writing Frankenstein.
Yes,
a big thing. Galvanization was electrifying recently dead muscles so that they would twitch and move. So it gave the appearance of life, especially if you were to shock like the face and things like this, you would open the eyelids and stuff like that. And so it looked like they're having a little seizure or something like that. But the Mary Shelley book obviously was written at a party with a whole bunch of people, her brother as well, and there was a bet where it was supposed to have someone's supposed to write the scariest ghost story, and a whole bunch of them wrote different stories. One of them wrote about vampires, which is possible that it sort of started a renaissance of the vampire legend as well within the community. But obviously Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. As
Yes, that's right.
But I loved connecting with as well when Kenneth Branagh did Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because that was just brilliant, and it was unforgiving in a way that was just so sad.
There are elements that I liked that movie, I have to admit, but ultimately it's the sadness is what comes through.
But even in that, the change as well, because in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, she never mentions anything about electricity, galvanization. Might be mentioned, but there's nothing about electrifying it. Like, the big moment of it's alive with Frankenstein and the electricity going through him was more a cinematic choice at the time, because they had visuals they had to pay attention to, and it was cheap special effects to do a flashing, matte overlay. But in the original story, it was more based on Conrad Dippel, who was a man who was, I'm not sure if he was born in Castle Frankenstein, but he had a connection and he grew up in Castle Frankenstein, so much so that he wanted to change his name to the man from Frankenstein, or Old Frankenstein, or to the road to Frankenstein. Like that. But through his whole life, he tried to sell an ointment, which he said was the elixir of life. And at one point he tried to buy Castle Frankenstein when they were trying to sell it with the elixir of life, his Conrad Dippel's oil, but they didn't buy it, and unfortunately he died. So it didn't work.
He's dead.
But even like looking back into the whole idea of is reanimation possible, at least in the way that Herbert West is doing it, it doesn't seem to be, because anything dead, it can't come back to life. I mean, the processes that's going to reanimate it are off. And so like you've got brain death, and you've also got heart death, which is like it when the blood stops pumping around the body is one kind of death, and then you've got about 7 to in this film it says I think 5 to 12 minutes the brain can be dead.
That sounds right.
But I think from flatliners and from modern science, it's somewhere around 5 to 7, I think. And that's like varies, and it means complete brain death. Is almost like means resetting of the memory and things. Having said that, I don't think anyone's really tried it. It's more people waking from comas and situations.
That's right. There's no, as far as we're aware, there's not been any Kiefer Sutherland kind of experimental scenarios going on.
And the remake of that film, Flatliners, was very good as well. But even from a scientific perspective, it's good. You should check it out. Yeah.
Okay.
But the reanimation of anything, even if you're looking into and saying, okay, well, lizards can regenerate their limbs, or
true.
I instantly was thinking about the zombie fungus, which gets into ants' heads, makes them climb to high sunny positions, and then grows out through the body of the ant. Things like this, but it's all relying on a host, and everything that they're doing, even laying eggs and stuff. It's doing this because it's feeding off that battery, that whatever it is. So you need that thing to be alive from the beginning. So the question does remain from all of the things on the websites about Re-Animator: if you had someone who was under the right circumstances and either just about to pass away or in the stages of you keeping them alive on life support, would that have an adverse effect? Would it be something more like Pet Sematary? I'm more thinking Pet Sematary 2, but
yes,
as in it would reanimate them so that they would just be able to work again. They're just a more asshole version of themselves.
Yeah, that's right. It's the animalistic side of us that remains.
Ooh, a Dorian Gray crossover. That'd be fun.
Ooh. We're kind of talking around a lot of the kind of components that make up this, and the essential ingredients that is about reanimation itself, and where it's scored from. And we see with Stuart Gordon's direction, we're dedicating these next kind of podcasts to Stuart Gordon, is that arguably nobody has done Lovecraft as well as he has done on screen. And I think that's something to be said to the way that he's able to just tap into the kind of sheer madness, anarchy, and the bloody special effects that comes across, and the morphic way that the human body can transform itself is probably one of the things that is so fascinating about the films that he created and produced and directed. With this one in mind, and then this will come into kind of, as I always ask the question about when did you first watch it and what was your memory of it. This is why I think this film did stick in my mind so highly, because I would have been in my teens of some kind when I watched it. Unlike some of the horror films that I've mentioned, I've often mentioned that I always seem to be watching them with my cousin and something like that. This is definitely one I embarked on my own, and we will jump down to the bit later on. But the thing that really stood out to me, besides Jeffrey Combs' performance, was the kind of rapey scene with the disembodied head. Moment that
Dean's daughter
was really, really uncomfortable to watch, and still is quite uncomfortable to watch, but it sticks in your mind, so but that was, I remember that being my gut reaction from it I was still and I have always been fascinated with the Frankenstein stories, so I think that's probably why it sat with me and stuck with me, and why I do kind of champion it as one of my favorites, because it is one that I will still want to go back and watch, and do continue to go back and watch. But what about you, Richard? When did you first come across the world of Herbert West?
Oh, well, I'm probably, I guess, late into it, like in the late 20s, I guess. Yeah,
sure.
It was the sort of thing that I think I read something about or saw something about it that was along the same lines, or it had subject matter that I was interested in. Or had a good poster.
It did.
Yeah. I was surprised because I didn't look at it in the capacity of going, oh, this is rated like, such and such.
Mm-hmm.
I was very surprised when the heavy R elements, sort of snuck up in your face.
Yeah.
But no, that stuck in my mind. But so many things stuck in my mind. I love campy horrors like Evil Dead and things like that mix up those sort of things, especially in elements that kick it to the creepy. I remember when I was a kid, there was a horror film called House, and it was just because of the timing of the shots. I rewatched it recently, the scene that sort of like shocked me a lot, and it was simply because the hard cut was something that you didn't expect. But it's the same thing in comedy. If you watch that same scene now, especially when she gets shot out of a window or something like that, bursts out of a door, it's highly comedic. Critters, the same sort of way. It's got a sort of campy feel, but it still has a lot of good effects. Even in this, there's like so much blood, and the subject matter is so extreme. If you think about it from on that way, you've got to sort of paint a little bit of a picture over the top of crude effects. But it's so much better that it's practical effects and not CG, because you wouldn't be able to have that imagination applied to it. I don't think it. With CG, it sort of all becomes a 2D matte sort of blank thing that's on top that blurs things together a lot worse. When you look at the remake of The Thing and how they had a whole bunch of practical effects, but then they went in afterwards and CG'd over their faces just to clean things up. But it didn't. It just made it look all like it was all done on a computer, and it's no fun. But no, that's all of those practical effects I was a huge fan of, because again, I think it was more down the Dead road, the Romero road, Old Romero Road, which was looking into obviously Tom Savini's work with special effects, and I think that was probably where I saw images from it. That, and I used to have an old monster book, which I used to love going into the library and having a look at the big pictures of these terrifying creatures, which I had no context and couldn't put them all together. But
cool.
In there was a full collection of all the Frankenstein, so I knew from a very early age that all of these were at least a portrayal of Frankenstein. It's fantastic, and even though Stuart Gordon and Dennis Paoli originally intended to have a faithful sort of relation of HP Lovecraft's to the film, and have that as a common story, it was unfortunately sort of pushed in to have more of a parody of those Frankenstein elements. Which I guess pays into homage of that. Original HP Lovecraft story didn't really have a lot of closure in it. It didn't have a lot of contained scenarios. What I think is interesting about Lovecraft is where Stephen King is always told that his endings suck, H.P. Lovecraft always, I feel, gets off the hook because it's the unknown. Not saying that it's bad at all, but because there's this fear of the unknown, it's okay to leave it open to this either terrible scenario ending, which just leaves you wanting more, or a pan up into the skies with a big Cthulhu-shaped lightning flash or something. It lends itself to that sort of creepy, and that's what's brilliant about this too. Even with the Re-Animator, the subject matter at the beginning, and it's all about corpses. I know people who can't drive past cemeteries and look at them. A lot of people's fears with this would terrify them, I'm sure, to even see like that.
It's interesting because you were talking about the campiness and stuff, and the Evil Dead kind of came into mind, and that, which I completely agree with. But it's there was actually a comic crossover called Army of Darkness versus Re-Animator, which saw Ash Williams go head to head with Herbert West, which is kind of fun. I think it was 4-issue story arc off the top of my head.
It's a graphic novel, like a comic.
It was a graphic novel, comic, Well, but I'm just going to see if I can try. By Dynamite Entertainment. I just looked it up here. Which was kind of a bit of fun. But I just think that marries what you were saying about how that kind of wacky kind of comic, but very kind of gritty, bloody horror that both these films kind of embody is a good reflection of the style of film that we're talking about.
Speaking of married, actor David Gale's wife ended up divorcing him shortly after the film came out because of the scene in which he attempted rape of the Megan character.
Right. Okay. Wow.
Ooh.
There's a lot. Yeah, we should talk about the one Megan is Barbara Crampton, who is one of the scream queens when it comes to horror, We see her as well in coming up in From Beyond. And more recently, she was seen in, it's not so recent now, it's nearly 10 years old, but You're Next. She was in that, which was, the Mumblegore movement guys. Adam Wynyard directed that. Great. I love that film. But she plays the matriarchal kind of character in that, which is really cool. And she's done loads of things. She's still doing loads of things. Like she's a bit like, a testament to her, why she is one of the screen queens. Like people still want to see her, getting into kind of bloody ridiculous situations. And so all right, so look, we've kind of been bandying around about the film itself. Let's as we often do, talk about the plot narrative now as our structure, and we'll go through the first film, Re-Animator, and kind of talk about those moments that resonated for us along the way. I really love the opening of this film. I don't know about you. It's quite straight to the point. We kind of get introduced to Herbert West quite quickly in like a medical school somewhere in Switzerland. And we get the kind of dean being called to kind of some disturbance that's happened in the lab. When he gets in there with I think there's a policeman and a nurse that are in there. And one of the school professors is a guy called Gruber, who's kind of on the floor screaming in agony. And there's this medical student, who is Herbert West, that's with him. And we see that Gruber's skin has got this kind of purple texture. His eyes are kind of bulging out of his head, and they kind of keep going until they explode. And like blood just goes everywhere. Great kind of creature effects at the very get-go. And the man falls dead on the floor, obviously, and this is where the dean kind of asks West if he killed the doctor, and West kind of comes back and says, "No, I gave him life." So, what about this as an introduction to what will be our main character?
Oh, I love it. As you said, straight to the point. It runs straight in, and it's what's behind the door. You want to know what's behind the door. You go into the door, you see this struggle, this old man and a young student, or two doctors, who knows, but one's definitely clearly older. Once he gets pulled off, doesn't Herbert West say he's had too much, or I gave him too much?
Yes, he does. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Something like that. And then, she turns around and says in her German accent, like, he killed him. And he goes, "No, I gave him life." Brilliantly. I love that as an intro, especially when you get a character where you don't know if it's the birth of the villain or the birth of the protagonist, or it's just going to be a cutaway scene, which is going to be like,
Well, it's one of the
subject matter.
That's one of the things I like about Herbert West, because he's not your out and out villain, and that that comes later on in the fact when we get presented with the other doctor character, the guy that we were just talking about, and who's very much the villain of the piece, but his sense of or lack of morality or lack of morals that Herbert West carries kind of makes him kind of bridge the two. It makes it easy for us to champion him a little bit, especially when he does stand up and occasionally does the right thing along the way, although to his own ends. So it's kind of he's just I just find him a really fascinating character.
But even up until that last scene, he throws his workbook or his bag, and he says, "My research," and he throws it over to Dan Kane, which ends up being his partner. So I don't know. It's again, it feels as if the whole time he's almost like a middleman. He's not in film. You can have like a whole bunch of villains. I think there's like 3 main classes of villain. And in Indiana Jones, they have the 3, and they have them all at different introductions. So you've got the main, like, one who's the stand-backy one who doesn't necessarily fight, but they're the mastermind. Then you have the more front house, like, heavy sort of one who's just really going to get into a big brawl. And then you might have one that's going to be a double crosser or something like that, who's like, that sort of, I wasn't expecting that person to be in this way inclined. But in this sort of state, he doesn't even feel like any of those categories of villain, because again, you feel on his side almost just because you've never gotten enough evidence to think that he is completely immoral.
Yeah.
You haven't necessarily got a lot of evidence towards his morality.
No, that's right.
But you haven't got a clear thing of going, if he had a gun in his hand, would he point it at me?
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Well, no.
And that's what the novel touches on that. Like, there's a turning point in the novel where the narrator kind of then suddenly has a moment of fearing for his life, working alongside West. And I don't know if we necessarily get that. Definitely not in this first one anyway. We're introduced for the first time to Miskatonic University. This is where West turns up to kind of pursue his studies. I'm kind of jumping through this a little bit, but this is where he meets Dan Kane, as you mentioned, who's played by Bruce Abbott, who's also a medical student working at the university. And
interesting. Miskatonic University is the university in Arkham, and
yes,
it's Dan Kane, even though it's spelt differently. There's Bob Kane with Batman, who wrote and created Batman.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and Arkham Asylum, is that where you were going with that?
Yes, exactly. Because the reason that they got the Arkham Asylum reference apparently was supposed to be because of the HP Lovecraft city, in which case a lot of these stories sort of take place in there. And there's a great map online. I think they've got some D&D campaigns that you can play where it has maps pointing to Innsmouth and pointing to the Dulwich and things like that.
That's cool.
For the Dunwich Horror and things like that.
Yeah.
It's really cool, and the map of the Miskatonic University and stuff like that.
That's sweet. I like it. That's cool.
Yeah.
So we are introduced to the Miskatonic University, as I said, and we get introduced to what will be our lead protagonist, maybe, with Dan.
Yeah.
And
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's basically the. Herbert West turns up and kind of becomes the lodger, and he converts the basement into his own personal laboratory. And there we are. When we first introduced to West, this is where we get, and we're already kind of get this animosity between West and Dr. Cole Hill. That's a character's name that I forgot from, played by David Gale. And this is where West is kind of insinuating that Hill stole the theory of brain death from Dr. Gruber, the character we saw killed at the very beginning. And Hill vows that West will never get a passing grade in his class. So there's an altercation between these two characters from the get-go.
Yeah. And animosity is as well, not necessarily towards wholly towards Carl, but I always thought towards Dan as well. Just because he sort of like brushes him off and looks at his body and things like this. But it's this more focus and these blinkers that he's got just about that one thing.
Yes.
But also says he sounds as well learned because he mentions to Dr. Hill that his thesis on the location of the will in the brain in Europe was considered to be, what does he say? Interesting.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. But again, he's studied a lot of these things, and so you get the impression as well he has studied under Dr. Gruber. So whatever he's studied, Dr. Hill knows.
Yes.
And has plagiarized and tried to put his own spin on it. But before this as well, you even see Dan Kane's character trying to save a life through defibrillation, with again, it's like bare chest nudity.
Yes.
But a scene which is echoed later on. But the Dan Kane character in the original story didn't exist. He sort of is the one who is going to take the place of the narrator.
Yes, that's right.
And again, as you said, is the protagonist, because again, in this medium, it's needed. And I really think it aids the story, especially because you get to see his distraught reactions throughout the situations happening around you.
Yeah, no, I agree. We kind of, you're right. We need that because of West's eccentricism. I can't say that word very well. Eccentricity. That's better.
Yes.
Because of Herbert West's eccentricity, you need somebody to be kind of the grounding kind of character that pulls the narrative through, and that's who we have in Dan Kane in this. Which kind of and yeah, you're right. We do. We need that journey to occur in order for the audience to kind of travel along that narrative, as you said.
And he seems like a pure soul. Like, you know, these sort of
He
horror
does,
films.
yeah,
and always like those pure soul characters.
Yeah. And that's why we have that opening scene or introduction to him where he is trying to hell be damned pursue with kind of keeping this person alive, and that in itself, that pursuit is what would connect to his interest with what Herbert West is doing, even though it's unethical. He has this drive or interest in trying to kind of prolong life, so that's where that kind of connection, and it marries in a good way, you know. So it works.
I was even going to say as well, even with the relation of, I was just thinking in terms of the ideals of having a protagonist in a story, and both of the characters of Dan and Megan or Megan are like the lovers in Commedia dell'arte, and especially in this sort of sense where a lot of people would have like that sort of campy element. In Commedia dell'arte, it's an Italian improvised street performance, which a lot of the time worked with rhyming couplets and exaggerated physical characteristics. But they would also wear leather masks, usually with extenuating physical characteristics like noses, cheeks, but a lot of the time moles, which were supposed to be the personification of horns growing through, because these were supposed to be larger than life characters. But out of all of the characters, there would be two lovers sometimes, and those lovers didn't have a mask, and they were the pure ones, because they were the ones who were the reflection of the society. Because even when you look at theatre, you go back to the whole Greek thing, theatre means truth. Yes. So the idea of wearing a mask was the idea of masking that. It's the idea of, we know we're up here performing and doing all of that. That makes it true. Even within that, there's I think it's the Japanese masks, which are painted in such a way that if you turn it a certain way, I think it's up or down, you'll get a frowny face or a smiley face.
That's right.
It's amazing how much, I don't know, it's almost like that self-aware in theatre has always been the sort of stand-up. We have a freedom of speech now. We're not going to necessarily get shot, hopefully, if we go on stage and say something that we do in a comedic way, but it's a way that we can push these issues. Back then might have been the exact same thing, them being able to talk about historical ethics through a performance, in which case their mask wasn't necessary for their protection, but to highlight the fact that this is just a performance, a communication of an idea. It's nothing necessarily to get upset about. I'm not doing a march here.
Yes. Oh, that's cool. I love that little insight you gave to us there, because it does kind of make me kind of look at the role that Dan and Megan play in this in a slightly different fashion.
Especially then when you couple in the nudity element of it. In a filmic element, you can see how a lot of films have used nudity in a way at which it's going to most utilized to have an emotive effect. And so I can't remember, but 6 Feet Under used to use it very well. In highlighting moments and characteristics of characters. But even that scene later on in the film, it's shocking, because it is stripping that pure character completely down, and it's worse than, you could probably see in a lot of films now. Even, the nudity in Texas Chainsaw Massacre and things like that. It's almost similar on par to the nudity in Cannibal Holocaust.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Sort of has that sort of you want to look away, but
No, that's completely right. I agree.
Putting that creepy element.
It is. It really is. Yeah. I mean, and that's exactly right. So, what's interesting though is you're talking about purity, but there is a slight impurity in the fact that they are, when we're introduced to Dan and Barbara, they are kind of having this clandestine love affair. And it's because she is the daughter of the medical school dean called Dr. Halsey. And so everything is a bit covert in the way that they're going around with each other.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know, and maybe it's a cop-out, but I almost found it follows the cabin in the woods sort of rule. As in, but they're not virgins. It's we make do. As in, it also think about what kind of film it's going to know that it needs to market itself as. A love story, or even the element of that, they've got nudity anyway, so they're playing with obviously a riskier audience than turning around and saying, no, it's going to be something that necessarily is worried about when you're reanimating the dead.
I mean, yeah, you're right. It does play along with that, but like if you do look at the end result, though, it doesn't end well for the couple. So you could argue that because of their relationship, they were always going to be doomed. You know,
yeah.
So,
and again, it plays back to that, the unknown and that sort of thing. Even at the end of Rocky Horror Show, I remember seeing a performance of it, and right at the end of Superheroes, when Brad and Janet in the film, they're like, crawling around on the ground in a circle, and it's supposed to be this perpetual idea of they're always crawling to find each other lost in the darkness. But on stage, there was a moment where they actually looked at each other and they went to go and hug, and Janet turns away and is like, "Nah, too much." And then they have this moment where they stop, they look back at each other, and they just have this beautiful moment where they run and hug, and they're sort of like, yes, okay. And they walk off into the distance. But it's that idea of going, is that relationship going to come back to what it once was? Can it? Is it going to be something new, or is it just going to be holding on like in South Park until they finally say, call it quits?
Yeah.
But I don't know. It felt like there was a little bit of hope there.
Yeah, I agree. The hope is in there. Yeah, and right to the very end, that hope is there. Yeah, that's right.
And that's what purity thrives on.
Absolutely. So we are introduced to those guys, and Dan at this point then discovers that West has reanimated the dead cat, Rufus. In the basement.
So just before that, the entrance as well, when he's going to rent the apartment, is a fantastic scene, and you instantly that's when you really get solidified of Herbert West's character and how he's just got his blinkers on. He's just got the money right there. Where the money comes from, I think, is very interesting too. It's almost like a question in the room: how does Tommy Wiseau get that much money?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But you get it almost. That's what I mean, an almost sense of innocence to his character in the way that he rents that room. But you also get from that first scene that there's a cat wandering around. Which again, you can go online to see, does the cat survive? You can go and look at that if you haven't seen the film yet. I do encourage you if you're worried about that. But something happens and they're looking for the cat, and then they find the cat is in Herbert West's fridge.
Yes.
In which his reaction to her is hilarious at all times, but he's constantly just looking at her as if who are you to even talk? Not even to me, but to talk.
Very beneath him.
Yeah, she's very much an extension from that. But again, it almost seems almost commedia dell'arte, the idea of how characters would react. There's a character called Il Dottore who is either played as a doctor or a lawyer, because at the time those were the rich people who were very fat and very whatever, you give me money, I'll tell you what to do.
Yeah.
So it's a very much of a look like that. It's as in, you are nothing, and I'm telling you you're nothing.
Yes.
But then I'm just treating her like an extension of Dan, who is obviously very upset too, because I was just going to bring in how hypnotism and the question of hypnotism, which is more in the original book and the extended version of HP of the Re-Animator film.
Yes.
Which, if you are looking for the film, make sure you do see the extended version of it. It has bounds on scenes, especially one later on with Dr. Carl Hill and Herbert West. But anyway, this question of even how Herbert West is treating the different characters and being nice when he's got eye contact with Dan and cordial and things like this, and then just snapping straight back to this dragon every time he's looking at Megan, could also be playing with this thing, because he says, I knew how much you cared for the cat, and so I didn't want you to come home and find this dead, smelly cat. I had to put it in the fridge.
Yes.
There was a question as well of whether or not he killed the cat.
Yes, that's right.
Obviously, it's almost obvious to most people, I'm sure. At this point in the film, you would think that he was the one who did it. But wouldn't he have injected it the second that he had found it or killed it? Is the question a lot of people have imposed on the internet, because again,
I guess so.
On a precious corpse. We also don't know how it died. It seems to be broken in two. I don't know if that's purely from the second half of like when he reanimates it the second time.
Yeah,
but I'm jumping ahead. But yeah, she's totally distraught by it, and then later on, he at nighttime is awoken. Dan is woken by the sounds of duck-like creature.
Yeah,
travels downstairs, and sees an awesome scene where Jeffrey Combs is battling around with a black cat model on his back.
I love this scene. I mean, like if it's going to be camp, or if you weren't aware of how camp the film was going to be, you're surely aware of it in this scene. It's one of my favorite moments. It's just brilliant, and the animation of the creature is pretty cool as well.
Absolutely. Like some of the effects in this were just astounding. I mean, even with the blood, alone in this, there was so much blood apparently in there that what was it? There was a little trivia thing I wrote before. The special effects department went through 24 gallons of fake blood during the shoot.
Wow.
One of the producers said it was the bloodiest film he'd ever worked on. In the past, they'd never used more than 2 gallons. But yeah, it's extreme subject matter. I think needs to go with a lot of blood.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, at this point, the cat is killed because it gets loose, and they're now trying to find it. But even in the way that they're using it on the budget that they had, having the swinging light and the element of that. Even from a performance-wise, I mean, Jeffrey Combs, like, it's a funny scene. It's campy, but also too, I always find in that because you. Endow all of your things over the top and go, what would it look like if an actual cat was on his back? And you struggle to think that would it really appear to you in the time that you first saw it, not reliving it in your head in memory, that wouldn't it appear pretty much the same? But also, too, from a performance standpoint, like of Jeffrey Combs, a lot of the times with comedy, people are always told to play it straight. No, you just commit to your character and believe in it. Again, the same thing with objectives. Just follow through the objectives. The mother character in Everyone Loves Raymond wouldn't be the same unless you played that completely straight. But I always felt it runs both ways, because if you're doing something like this in a scene, you want to play it straight, because for all the people who are watching it and they're digging it and they're getting off on the performance of, getting carried away by you believing it, then that's good. For all the people who are going, oh, that's hilarious, but he believes it and he's hilarious going along with it too. Then you've also ticked that box. So it's a credit to your performance to always endow with it, or never go in half-assed.
No, that's right. That's right.
As well, this is one of my favorite scenes too, especially when they're talking about the cat and the idea of him saying, well, it's dead. And he goes, well, would you agree it's dead now?
That's comes of that.
Yeah, because again, it's extreme subject matter, especially if you've ever lost a pet, especially in a horrific way with car accidents or something like that. It's a terrible scene, but the blinkers that he puts on through that feel almost admirable. Because it feels like then you're going straight back to a science thing. Because again, fantasy glasses on, he injects this glowing serum into the cat and it comes back to life. How? And obviously it's certain organs aren't attached. How can it still make sound? How can it breathe? How can blah, blah, blah. But it's the same mentality as zombies, and the same as certain vampire lore and things like this. We give ourselves over to fantasies anyway because we're watching a film.
Yes.
But it's brilliant techniques, and even just using the glow fluid. I mean, as the glow stick fluid. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yes, that's right.
An iconic thing that even from the poster is just brilliant.
I think even I can't remember what version it was, but at some point there was a DVD version of this which had a glow stick attached to it, like glow stick thing with it. That's part of its, catch. I still remember seeing it in the stores. Anyway, we have this kind of great scene, as we said, with the cat, and as you said, the reanimated but then reanimated sequence of the cat to kind of show that this thing does work.
Not the first pussy scene in this film, but the no, it is the first pussy scene in this film. Not the only. That's what I meant to say.
Ooh, yes. Oh yeah, that's right. So Hill has a dislike of both Dan and West, as we mentioned, but this is where he also gets Dr. Halsey to kind of side with him in what they are trying to do and get them kind of barred from the school. and in successfully doing so, West and Dan then sneak into the morgue to test the reagent on a human subject in an attempt to salvage their medical careers.
Yeah. Even from that, like the film version, borrowing certain elements of HP Lovecraft's, not necessarily this story, even though he had mentioned that he has classist elements in it.
Yeah.
This scene when Dan is talking to the dean has elements of just how much that sort of classist element could be prevalent, because the man with the power is now completely uncompromising.
Yeah.
Of course, the situations aren't just he is his dean, but Dan is dating his daughter, and there's obviously almost blinded by emotion. But as Dan says those literal words, he seems to at least trying to make the dean see reason in what he's saying. Think about it, like, as in, don't be rash because of those emotional circumstances. But again, I heard a reviewer commenting on that specifically, whether it relates back to the classist elements of how H.P. Lovecraft would write. And how it's just that the big man holding the little man down.
Yeah,
the middle man, I guess it's more where Lovecraft was coming from.
Yeah, I agree.
Not the little man, the middle man.
The middle man, that's right.
Yeah.
So we have this moment where they've kind of been kicked out and they're trying to reestablish themselves within the medical community by proving that they can reanimate corpses, and the only way they see fit to do that, as I said, is to break into the morgue of the university and try and test it on a subject, which they kind of get in there and they do that, but then the corpse does revive, but it goes on this kind of massive rampage. And this is the first indication of, or not necessarily actually, because the cat did it too, but we get an insight into, yes, the reanimation process works, but when the undead come back to life, they are a bit more savage and animalistic, as we said, in their behavior. So they kind of just go on a rampage and on an attack. And this is what's happening in this kind of closed off kind of morgue area that we kind of see the scene play out in. And the two of them are trying to kind of defend themselves, at which point Halsey then turns up on the scene, and he kind of is a bit kind of dumbfounded by what's been going on. And, in doing so and trying to prevent the situation, he then gets attacked by the creature. Or, I don't know, what do we say, undead? They never really say undead, do they? But
the Re-Animated.
The Re-Animated.
Yeah, as in you've got the undead, which could either be zombies or it could be Nosferatu type sort of things. Obviously, this is all, I guess, Urban Dictionary sort of stuff. Get corrected in the comments. Right. But even if you look at the Cabin in the Woods on the board of all of the monsters, I was just looking it up then, because on IMDb or Wikipedia, I think. No, IMDb. The cast has down the actor who plays that first Re-Animated character as Melvin the Re-Animated.
Okay.
And I know that on the board there was a Kevin, and I thought there might have been a Melvin, and that was the referral to the Re-Animated. But it actually says the Re-Animated on the board. Not necessarily saying that's the whole, that's canon now. Morty, it's just more like everyone has their own references, and that's one of them. The Re-Animated, I think, would be these more zombie type characters. But it felt like to me when I was watching it at this point, it was more about the ratio, purely because I don't know, from the aspect of going, if this is what's happening to the corpses, I was listening mainly to Herbert, and from that he was saying either I need to up the dosage or something around that.
Yeah.
So having said that, on review I have kept more attention to that.
Well, I get that though, because and I think that's what, again, part of what I like about it, because that's kind of, it feels like it embodies and embeds the film into the kind of science language that's at play here as well, and grounds that, because it is like, as a scientist would, you experiment along the way, like you are, and they are, and that does come across, and the manic unpredictability that will come across when you are experimenting with the unknown, and he is thinking like a scientist as it's going. It's like, I need to, I didn't have enough dosage, and then that's why the reaction is happening the way it is. And I like that, because he sticks to that the whole way through the film. You know, it's all about the way he's approaching it and trying to change what he's done before and adapt it accordingly, because the evidence is there that they can reanimate these people, these cadavers, and they but the results fall flat on their face because of whatever they're injecting it with, or the quantity of what they're injecting it with. Yeah. So
which, again, we never really get the idea of what it is, but it has been something that Herbert West said that he has perfected when working with Gruber over in Germany or Switzerland or somewhere. Switzerland. Yeah. But even to that, the whole story idea of it as well, as you're saying, pushing those boundaries of what is acceptable in science. At the time which Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was written, I think it was just after a lot of the autopsies were illegal, and so the only way to study the dead was to grave rob.
Yes,
so you would have to go and rob the graves of people. I was even thinking that at the beginning of this discussion, when we were talking about the early stages of the film, I find it interesting because it cuts all of that out. Even when watching Young Frankenstein, I remember that being a big part of the film that lead up to getting the body into the thing. At least they're in a hospital. I kind of like that idea of best case scenarios for that sort of thing. Flatliners I really enjoyed because it was boundaries were very contained, and it seemed like it was best case scenario. They were medical students, they were doing it under medical supervision. There was parameters towards doing it. But the doing those sort of things, because H.H. Holmes as well suffered. I brought him up in a previous podcast. He was a serial killer who built a hotel, murder hotel. But he started off as a doctor, and to do this, you'd need to get cadavers at a time in America, especially where they still had, it was illegal to perform autopsies or to keep the body unconsecrated for a certain amount of days. So you would get paid not necessarily as a student, but as a person. If you brought a body to the university, they would pay you to get that body, and the fresher the better. So then the students would be able to perform autopsies or to study the corpses and the bodies. And that's why one of the justifications for H.H. Holmes or Herbert West, Herbert Webster Mudgett, sorry. Similar.
Yeah.
One of the justifications he did for that was he used to make the hotel a factory so that he would get bodies and bones so that he could sell them to the museums and to the universities that they could be studied. And so, it was interesting. Some of the corpses that he said that went missing in the hotel were actually found to be on some of those people. Others, not so much. He said, no, they're probably sold to this place, and they weren't. But that's a whole interesting story by itself. Some of the people he said he killed in prison came forth and said, I'm still alive.
That's right. There's a lot of, I think there was only 9 confirmed.
He admitted to 27 in prison, but then later on said it could have been about 200. But he was only convicted and sentenced to death, I think, for the family, which I think was about 5 or 6.
I think you're right. It was a low number, but supposedly there's hundreds.
Arrested for tax evasion or horse theft or something menial. So,
it's always that. It's always the
exactly. It's the little ones that get you. What was an Al Capone? He was arrested for tax evasion or something small.
There was.
They could get him on that. So
that's right.
Pay your taxes, guys.
Pay your taxes. That's key.
And currently, wash your hands and stay at home
while you pay your taxes.
To stay home.
Okay, so then the morgue scene happens. Dr. Halsey is killed by the Re-Animated, and at this point, basically West and Dan, they kind of, I think they kill the Re-Animated cadaver at that point.
Herbert West grabs one of those drills that we see in the first scenes that Carl Hill's cutting the scalp open with, and rams it through his chest.
Yes.
I thought he was going to cut his spine or something. I don't know.
Yes. Maybe. It's a good moment. And at this point, they realize that they have a fresh dead specimen in Halsey, just recently killed. So West then takes upon himself to inject Halsey with the reagent, and Halsey returns to life, but in a zombie-like state, as well as animated.
And grabs Herbert West and Dan and lifts them up off the thing just as Megan's coming in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and that's where again becomes interesting because like with Day of the Dead and Day of the Dead and not Dawn of the Dead.
Return?
Land of the Dead.
Oh, Land of the Dead. Sorry,
yeah. But anywhere which we see a reanimated body, seeing reminiscences of its old world, or even acknowledging it all, because even before this, he said about Melville, the first reanimated corpse, that he turned around and listened to him when he said stop or something.
That's
Yeah. So he's interested about that. And also, I find that scene when he's got the dead body there on the ground, he's dragging the Dean's body over, and he's just trying to communicate to him that this is the best chance we have. We do it now or we don't do it at all.
Yeah.
Right. But gets him up there. But the Dean then instantly shies away because he's ashamed, I assume, of how he
is to his daughter. Yeah.
He hasn't seen his reflection at this point, but I guess you'd feel like a bit of a goose, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I'm dead. This is embarrassing.
Oh God! Look at me! God, don't take me out to a fancy restaurant, Hey.
Yeah. I haven't got my lippy on.
Like,
Yeah. Even if you look at it is an interesting point of view, because if you were to redo this film, you could do it from a more scientifically accurate point of view, as in you could leave more scientific questions in it by, let's say, when he kills Melville, he doesn't necessarily destroy the heart, he destroys the brain, or he does something like that there. Because again, if you imagine like the brain is still active, then it has that sort of ability, because we don't know how he died. I think it said heart failure.
Yeah.
Destroys the heart again. It doesn't, or drain him of the fluid, maybe have to bleed it out. In Evil Dead, at least the law was it had to be dismemberment. So it wasn't just you had to sever the head. The head would come after you. You had to cut it up into the smallest bits that you could.
Mm-hmm.
But in this, it raises that whole question of how much is reanimated, which I'll get to in the last scene.
Yeah.
But, so he gets embarrassed and runs away. And what I love about this is the fact that nobody really goes up to him or acknowledges that he's this monster. It's great.
Yeah.
Or the other guy who's dead over the side.
Yeah, that's it.
The busted security door to the freezer I'm in.
It's great. I love it. So something I just want to touch on is you were talking about if it got remade, and obviously that can be quite sacrilegious when people kind of talk about.
Well, the rights are available for anything Lovecraft.
That's it. And speaking of, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because we've just had Color Out of Space just come out with Nick Cage, which is a big Lovecraftian kind of film, and that was kind of released under Spectrevision, which is Elijah Wood's. He's one of the kind of founders of Spectrevision, along with director Daniel Noah and Josh Waller, I think it is. Anyway, so look, their main drive has been mainly focusing on horror films, and we've kind of seen things like Mandy came out under that. Under their banner, as I said, and Daniel Isn't Real. But with the Lovecraftian thing and the success of Color Out of Space has made them say that they have plans for others along the way of the Lovecraftian film world. And it does pose the question of maybe Re-Animator could come into effect.
Yeah.
That's not official. I'm just kind of banding that around. They did on record say that they have other plans for Lovecraftian films in the works. So
you could see Elijah Wood playing Herbert West, couldn't you?
You could actually. That's true. You could. He's got that kind of very kind of quirky sense. Like if you haven't seen, there's a film. What was the one he just did recently with Come to Daddy? It's available to stream at the moment on demand. And I think it's actually on home entertainment release as well. But he's very straight in that. Again, very straight, but it's a comedy, a black comedy. So it's kind of interesting to watch the dark play with that. And I really recommend that film. By the by, if people haven't caught that one yet, definitely go check it out. It's good fun. So I just thought I'd throw that into the mix. So we have this kind of moment, so Halsey's come back, he's reanimated, he gets taken off and sectioned in a ward under, this is where I'm going to forget.
A ward that's attached to Dr. Carl Hill's office.
That's the one.
A glass door. It reminds me of like one of those school pigeonhole sort of like,
Yeah.
But yeah, that's great. I love it.
So he's under the care of Dr. Hill now, and this is where Hill.
Again, sorry, just at that point, what Dr. Carl Hill was saying at the beginning was pretty much he has found the location of the will in the brain, and if you give them a lobotomy at that point, you'll be able to control their will pretty much.
Yes.
And another thing which in the HP Lovecraft story, Dr. Hill has been. He was spoken about as a soldier, a military doctor who is sort of in a third-person scenario, goes missing and then comes back later on as a reanimated element. But he himself in that deals with hypnosis and the idea of using the ability like Dracula and a lot of the early horror film. Yeah. Horror films do of hypnosis or the idea of someone willing you or convincing you to do something that you wouldn't usually do.
Yes.
Which I guess is in any horror film the biggest thing, someone convincing you to do something you don't want to do, even if it's yourself.
Yeah.
Meta.
Yeah. Oh, I like what we did there. It's an interesting one. And I guess in this instance, and you're right, it's more. They suggest that more, I guess, in the book, but and this the visual component of this is obviously does he do it? I guess he does a little.
Extended version, he has a little bit more. As in, I didn't realize it when I saw it. I thought it was more about just the intense, I guess, performances, but I thought it was more directional, mainly because of Herbert West being so prominent. So then to see the cut down version, it was hard. But you'll see in that a scene when. I'll mention it when I get to it.
Cool.
You only get little hints of it at this point.
Yes. Yeah. This is when Dan and Megan then break into Hill's office to kind of get evidence that Hill trying to lobotomize her father, essentially, or has already succeeded in doing that. So they're trying to get evidence that that's what's occurred. And this is where we find out that Hill has been obsessed with Megan. All this time as well. Hill goes to kind of confront West at this point as well, so at the basement lab where he's been staying, and threatens to blackmail West if he's to continue with his research. And basically because he wants to take credit for the reagent that West has come up with. Again, this is kind of, goes back to what West had said at the very beginning, that kind of he just kind of uses other people's work and plagiarizes them for his own gain. So obviously this doesn't sit well with West, and so while Hill is distracted, West basically kind of hits him over the head and then decapitates him with a shovel, which is great.
Some, more Evil Dead tiebacks there.
Yeah.
But that scene again, it has an extension in it in the long version. That's where I was saying you get more of a sense of a hypnosis happening, where he makes him stay still. There was a review that I saw on YouTube where there was mentioned that you would expect Herbert West to not put up with this and to stand up and to react. In which case, I must admit, during that scene, I thought the same. I thought he was more shocked and off-put, like by the moment of not expecting him to see him in his space.
Yeah.
But through that, he hypnotizes him, and he sits there and praises him for some of the work that he does, because he looks through his notebook and says he's going to be a genius, and tears run down Herbert West's face. And it's a good question from a performance standpoint too, because when I saw that longer version, I saw it as an idea of him fighting with the static nature of him having to stay still.
Yeah.
Whereas it's in the dialogue seems much more like, it's him finally getting recognition.
Yeah.
But I don't feel that's his character. I don't feel like that, at least Jeffrey Combs' performance of Herbert West necessarily cares about at least Hill's recognition. Why would he care it from a plagiarist.
Yeah, true.
Like so, and again, who's now threatening and blackmailing to take his work, which he is so proud of. In which case, he turns around and decapitates him, which is great.
Yeah.
Which again, I read as a more triumph of the will for him to do it, whereas most people would be just having to get up the nerve of having to fight back. Like in any circumstance, he not only hits him unconscious, but decapitates him.
Yes. And I love the extension of this as well, because he then obviously has this opportune moment to kind of reanimate this decapitated head.
It's fresh.
It's just the little quizzical kind of looks that he kind of
never done whole parts.
Yeah, it's like, oh, hold on. I love it.
Which again in the magazines by Lovecraft was one of the extended sort of stories, which was them playing with different body parts, putting them together, and which takes off a bit more in Bride of Re-Animator, and things like that.
That's right.
But and works in some fantastic effects there with stop motion, with the little hand in the eye and stuff. But that's more of a Frankenstein or a Bride of Frankenstein, I guess. Bride of Re-Animator.
Yeah, that's it. So he kind of reanimates Hill's head and body while
separately,
and while West is questioning Hill's head and taking notes, Hill's body kind of comes up and knocks him unconscious, and the body basically kind of then grabs Hill's head and goes off with it, and stealing West's reagent along the way, and returning to his office, and this is where we get the mind control over Halsey happening that you were talking about. So this is and I get what you were talking about with the Day of the Dead,
with Bub.
But the Bub character kind of then getting control over, and in Land of the Dead too, we get this kind of, as you said, combined kind of mind and control. That's one of the lead zombies, or reanimated in this case, has over their own kind. So he has this kind of control over Halsey, and he basically sends Halsey off to kind of kidnap Megan from Dan. And the next confrontation, and this is then where West and Dan then track Halsey back to the morgue, where they find Hill's body holding his head in a compromising position over a restrained Megan, and this is the rapey scene.
Just before that, just on the serum, when Carl Hill, Dr. Carl. Sorry, I'm just about having Neighbours flashbacks.
That's it. That's where they got the name from.
Dr. Carl. Or Dr. Carl Kozinski, or what's his name? That's it. Yeah. Anyway, when he's looking through it, he makes a revised. He does something to the serum.
Yes.
Just because, again, when there was a Reddit page following, step by step, he does something to it. Doesn't say what it is, but he perfects it. That's what Dr. Hill says, and that's and injects it in some blood, which has a reactive property, which then makes him say, "I'm going to be a genius."
Yes.
Or I'll be famous, or something like that.
That's right.
That's when he gets hit by the shovel. So there is the suggestion of a better reanimated agent, which again hasn't been injected into the Dean.
Yeah,
but it's the new sort of reagent we're assuming that Dr. Hill would be at least using, and I'm assuming the West would as well, if it is working in the way that is. I don't know. But it's keeping track of it too. It seems to have his hypnosis seems to have a greater effect over the reanimated. At least we get that impression from here on, I guess.
No, you're right. Yeah, and so this is, and because he keeps injecting himself, or get his body keeps injecting himself. Yeah, that makes sense. And pouring blood into the tray where the head is sitting, so it's like he's feeding off. And this is the hint of cannibalism again coming into effect, albeit blood,
which is hilarious because I think most people would probably be rightly saying, how is he speaking? As in, where is he getting the air from? He's not going to pump his lungs and things like that. But That's part of the fantasy, isn't it?
It's part of the fantasy. Yeah. Okay, so this is so we kind of come into this kind of like reanimated. The compromising kind of weird scene. Hill reveals that he has reanimated and lobotomized several corpses from the morgue to do his bidding. This is where Megan though manages to get through to her father, who fights off the other corpses. So there is that kind of hint of the who Halsey used to be when he was living, and the human side of him kind of still being present. And this is where Halsey then turns on the other corpses and starts kind of tearing them to shreds and ripping them apart, and then chaos kind of ensues at this point here.
Just before that, I was going to say, when Dr. Carl Hill was walking into the morgue, the way he gained access to the morgue. He walks in because obviously he hasn't got a head, so he's placed a medical head which has like half fake like wax skin on it and half like internal organs of the head, and like scrubs over the top of that with a mask and whatnot. And he's sort of like slowly walking in with a large bag, which obviously has the head in it. Now, that's directly taken from the magazines from
that's right, the
HP
novel,
Lovecraft.
because it mentions about the plastic head.
Yeah, and Dr. Hill coming in that way.
That's right. That's right.
Which is great too, because that guard there, I don't know, he's reading a Playboy, he's reading something like that, and he goes break time, and he looks at the magazine, and I'm going, he's going off to wank.
He's gone for a wank.
First time it was a cigarette, now it's something before the cigarette.
That's it. So as I said, like mayhem kind of ensues inside the morgue again, and with the Halsey characters kind of trying to destroy the other corpses.
And the reanimated corpses that have come back are bodies that had previously been looked at by Herbert West and disregarded because they had ailments that wouldn't be the best circumstances. Maybe this new serum is able to reanimate more of the dead.
That would suggest that, wouldn't it?
Exactly. It insinuates it, because you get people coming up with more large lesions.
Yes.
Full frontal nudity.
Yes,
more full frontal nudity.
More full frontal nudity. That's right.
That's when at this point we have Halsey starts noticing and starts to attacking the other ones.
That's right.
Even though Dan is yelling out to Dr. Hill, like, the zombies are going to kill the one that you want, Megan. And he goes, I'll bring her back. Like, he doesn't care at this point. He's happy with the zombie-eyed woman.
That's right. There's a lot kind of going on here though too, isn't there? Because this is where the Halsey character grabs Hill's head and starts crushing his head.
Yes.
And we also get West having a fight with Hill's body and tries to give the body a lethal overdose of the reagent.
He has a theory.
Yeah. And then it's, to just try and destroy the body. That's right. If it's over, basically it's like an overdose is what he's trying to do. And then Hill's body then mutates and starts attacking West. And this is where the real Lovecraftian stuff comes up, with the body kind of pulling apart and transforming and morphing into different things.
Almost like The Thing. It reminded me a lot.
Exactly. Reminded me of The Thing as well. That's right. So then West kind of is like screaming out to Dan to kind of save my work. And this is what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and throws his book in the folder.
Throws the book as he continues to fight. And this is where he's then dragged off to what we believe is his death, although it's not.
Yeah. Place burns down or explodes or something.
That's right. And then Dan and Megan then kind of run out of the morgue. And they get to the lift just as one of the reanimated corpses then attacks and kills Megan at the end. And this is where Dan kind of this is mirror image, of when we first meet Dan, and he's got the blooded corpse of Megan, and he goes in to kind of try and save her. And this is where he then, in despair, injects her with the reagent. As the scene then fades to black, and we hear Megan screaming, implying that her reanimation has backfired.
Yeah,
and that is the end of the film.
Yay!
Cool.
I don't know. I kind of love that sort of ending as well, because I'm a big fan of Pet Sematary.
Yeah.
So very very happy to see that. But yes, no. Now obviously when I was looking into the whole reanimation of the dead and the serum and things like this, obviously I went down the deep Lovecraftian roots and the pages of the Necronomicon for all of the different media that has been out there. And one of the pages which I saw wasn't necessarily referring to the reanimation serum, but it was referring to certain reanimated characters from, I think it was Ash versus the Evil Dead. And you would see inside one of their skulls of, I think it was referring to a very like a zombie that had been made, or a reanimated corpse that had been living for a long time or a while. And inside it was just like you would imagine inside the Thing, like large web, like phlegm type things. It looked like you were looking inside someone's lung. All of these weird webbies type things all connecting it. But it made me think then in that last scene, something to do with the serum being not necessarily like portal, but something to do with that, something that we can't understand. And for the story purposes, and even with the Lovecraftian elements, we shouldn't understand, that makes the reanimation outer worldly. So therefore, it's not necessarily anything to do with the human elements or the biology of how the human body is pumping and living, or life or death. It is literally just doing, like, infecting it with a virus or a parasite or the Thing type thing, which replicates itself within the host, obviously trying to keep the host alive or feed off as much as it can, because in Evil Dead you'll see the decay of the body and how it will morph and mutate into certain different other things similar to the Thing. But it made me think in that last scene that how I've got a theory, and he's holding 2 big doses, and so you're going, I kind of like that. If he had, again, the perfect circumstances, like vats of this stuff, what would happen if he got a bear, killed it, injected it with it? Again, that's what I mean. Like, the morality of this is out the windows. But, perfect circumstances, what is he aiming for? Would he create a Cthulhu-type creature, like have a complete connection with a Deadite world? Because even from the Necronomicon and looking in that, there's different ladders of light in which you can travel on when resurrecting life, because it's conjuring of different things. And obviously it's a fictitious book that is missing pages as well within its story and narrative to keep it more illusory, but it hints to the suggestion that there's all kinds of what we would say demons out there in this sort of supernatural world that you would be able to call upon to invoke certain elements into it. So you might be able to actually resurrect someone who is completely pure and positive. You know what I mean? You might be able to get them too happy. You might be able to get them just off kilter, like, as in, oh, they're absolutely lovely, except they're a little bit rapey. You like, or complete deadite, like, as in, I always found that very element. And in the Necronomicon, there's the story about Abdul Hazred in Al-Azif jumping from the different ladders of light and describing it, but the difficulty in doing so. And it seemed like in the discussion of that, like a frequency. So crossing those 2 things over there, I found this story more of a science medical explanation or discussion about that Lovecraftian unknown and another window. So I found it quite good. Like same as in Ghostbusters with Vigo. Death is but a door, time is but a window, I'll be back. That's what he says.
So obviously, Richard, like, this is there's a lot of visual elements at play. There's a lot of physical and mental elements at play with this, which I think is why it resonates for the 2 of us. And before we kind of cast our opinion on the film itself and we start bowing out, I did want to kind of just touch on part of the legacy that comes with the franchise is obviously that there are 2 other films that kind of follow suit. And I don't want to go into them too much detail, because otherwise this could end up being one hell of a behemoth of a podcast. Yeah. But I do, as I said, want to touch on the fact that there are two sequels that follow this, and follows the line of Herbert West, and at least in the second film we do follow the Dan Kane character does come back again. And in this one, it's in the sequel, it's called Bride of Re-Animator, and again, that's a massive nod to the Universal films of Bride of Frankenstein. And we get this part of it, I guess, is something that's it feels like it is an extension, or it does, but it still uses a lot of the elements that are at play within the novel or of the Herbert HP Lovecraft novel itself. And we get more of a window into the psyche of West's character as well. There are elements of it that kind of reminded me a little bit of Return of the Living Dead, Bride of Re-Animator. What was your thoughts on the continuation of Herbert West's character? Was it merited? How did you feel about the sequel, the first sequel?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I kind of grew up on the whole, movie sequels and watched their slow degrade over time, because I watched all of the Children of the Corns as well.
Yes.
And kind of liked just that anything that expands on its lore a little bit and that includes any carryover of the subject matter, whether that be a director, a producer, or a cast member. Hell, even if we look at Dr. Sleep, I mean, the set alone was the nostalgia needed for that. Even if it was Stephen King ripping off something that he didn't personally like. But no, I was down for the whole journey. And then after reading the Lovecraft original, just saw how much more there was that they expounded on. And then tying it in with the Bride of Frankenstein film, which was brilliant with the hair, and obviously is a very iconic image. But even seeing her strapped down to the table where they're piecing everything back together and they're doing skin grafting is very interesting. It takes it to that next level where I like the first film in its simplicity. It's sort of the same way that the Star Wars films work. You can see that first film and you see its potential. You go, cool, that's what makes this one so good. Even talking about the sequel, one thing I didn't like was that Herbert West was most likely dead from the first film. However, I don't know if it's cuts from the extended version of the original Re-Animator or Bride of the Re-Animator, where they're actually injecting the serum. He takes a little bit and says, it's just to give me like that pep, keep me up or something like that, or to get me through the night or something like that. So it is hinted at that he's using it. So there's, I don't know, I like the hypothesis behind, that he could be the one case where it's worked, as in he's slowly taking little bits of it throughout his life, and it's keeping him somewhat immortal. Or the idea of the the string theory, the multiverse sort of idea. So you've got as in this universe he didn't die. Or something, but again, bringing Jeffrey Combs back is always an enjoyable experience, and it being so close to the original, having Dan as well back is really good. I don't know, it goes into that full campy sort of aspect, because you've got Carl Hill, who's got his head now strapped to bat wings, which wouldn't be able to support him in real life, and that's where you're really pushing the idea of going, okay, I'm still with you, but at least he's not going down Dean's daughters in this.
That's true. He's just evil for evil's sake in this one. That's right.
Yeah, because even from a standpoint from the film, I think in between these ones there was Dolls, which was a bit more restrained, even though it had a couple of scenes of full-on gore, which wanted to play more to the aspects of what they enjoyed about Re-Animator, or they thought the audiences enjoyed about Re-Animator. They kept most of the other film, there's only 2 scenes that are quite grotesque, quite tame. Whereas in this, I feel like it's almost been to more of that stop motion element, similar to the style that they were using in Dolls and in like the Puppet Master and things like that.
That's right.
But it takes you to that uncanny effect. I remember as a kid, some of the scariest moments I remember seeing was in Evil Dead 2, I think it was, when the reanimated corpse and the severed head dance and do the ballet. The off-kilter movement. And I remember Mad Monster Party, which was another animated thing with a lot of Hollywood stars in it and stuff like that as a kid. But that freaked me out as well. And I knew that was a cartoony thing that shouldn't freak me out, but it was the stop motion effects of it, which then led me to see King Kong, which I loved because it was a horror film, but it sort of made me feel grown up because I knew it was a horror film, but it was so old that it wasn't scary. As in the story was interesting, but as a kid it was hard to stay onto. The Frankenstein elements adding into this broadens the audience, but also brings it full circle back to that whole story of the love, the lost love and the reasons behind why they're doing this in the first place, or at all. It's the end game.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, the story kind of works. I mean, obviously, it's not as quite as I mean, when we're kind of moved away from Stuart Gordon's kind of visual technique and his vision that he had for Re-Animator, and we've got Brian Yuzna coming on board to direct the film. He was the producer on Re-Animator, and closely worked with the band Pictures guys who were producing on both areas. And prior to that, his only directorial kind of touch was actually another body horror kind of film, which is a classic in its own right, called Society. And he would go on to direct Return of the Living Dead 2. Sorry, not 2, 3, I beg your pardon. It was the third one. And then come back again for Beyond Re-Animator. So let's talk about that one, because this is the third installment of the franchise, and would actually take back that came out early 2000s. I don't have the thing in front of me. And it would see
2003.
Yeah, thank you. And would have that would see Herbert West in prison now, so he's been incarcerated. Which I thought was an interesting take, but this kind of fell a little bit flatter for me, and became a bit kind of, no pun intended, formulaic. It was a straight to video kind of release, and it kind of, you could see why it wasn't. It missed some of it. I loved actually seeing West in jail, and I liked that kind of concept of him then helping out the prison doctor, and that's where the experiments come out. I did like that avenue, but the rest of it was a bit too. And we get the warden trying to fill in for the Dr. Hill character, essentially, as the villain of the piece. And I did like the effects. Some of the effects I did like. I liked the dude that gets kind of cut in half, and he's he's the top half of his body still kind of chasing around and swinging across the bars and stuff to try and get to Herbert West. I kind of liked the camp side of that, but the rest of it was a bit.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I got a little bit annoyed because it had that sort of like mid-Saws sort of feel to it. Maybe it was just the colouring of it, but also too, as much as we say, as in the Dan character was the protagonist in it, it was shared because it was never like he was a bit part player, and that's what it really feels like in Beyond Re-Animator.
Yeah,
it just feels like a cameo performance, a cameo sort of drag in. It would have been really interesting to see him going off by himself or taking more of the lead. But because his energy was, I guess, part of the interesting part about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
but in certain aspects of it too, it takes more of a shock horror route, which again is why I mean, those mid Saw films were more about the gore out situation or that sort of thing. Missed a little bit of the heart. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It didn't feel the same.
Yeah, it wasn't quite there, was it? And yeah, you're right. He's lost a little bit of his personality's lost a little bit. I think I'm talking about West.
Yeah,
he's lost a little bit in there. So it definitely is the weaker of the three, and that often is the case with trilogies, that the third one doesn't ever kind of match up, which is a shame. So where, what is interesting though at the end of that film is that we see West kind of getting away and kind of escaping off into the distance, and in the dead of night. So it does pose the question that he's still out there and what has become of him. And I like that open-endedness with that character. It does make me kind of, and it says something about West as well, that in the sense that I would like to know where he's at now. We're another 10 plus years after the fact.
Yeah.
What is he doing? And I still think there's life in West yet.
Absolutely.
So I think
it would be interesting as well, even because I was thinking back when they were doing that first experiment in Re-Animator, at what period of time is that set? Because I think it's set in the 30s in the magazines or something, sometime around then. I'm not too sure. But it's, just in the idea of going, okay, we're going to get evidence. And it's like they've got a little dictaphone there, which I guess would probably be the primary way that they would be doing it. But I was thinking if they had any sort of video equipment or anything like that, I guess it would be available, maybe not in the university, and you want to keep it on the down low. You're not supposed to be in there. So strike that, reverse it. But as in the actor himself, as in it, exactly, if there's that chance to restart something, it's always best to do it whilst they're still alive and ticking and able to do it. Especially look at Ghostbusters films.
Yeah, that's right. And almost like passing the baton on, maybe you could. I mean, I can't see how you would have a Re-Animator franchise without West's character in it.
Yeah. If there would be any passing on, I think it would just be the serum and advancing,
exactly.
or as in, he would either go off into the moonlight or something like that.
So the other thing I'm just going to add as well is apparently back. I wasn't aware of this, but apparently back in 2011 there was a Re-Animated the musical that came out.
Oh, what?
Yeah, and I'm only just reading it as we are talking, so I have no background of that whatsoever, other than what I'm reading here. And it's in the similar kind of vein of Little Shop of Horrors, and when Evil Dead did the musical as well, so it's got that kind of splatter kind of thing going on.
Evil Dead the musical, I think it would be a very interesting thing. Unfortunately, it's hard to get something with songs that are good or at least palatable.
Yeah,
there's a couple of okay songs what is it? A warehouse employee, something like that. It's the love song, but it's a beautiful sort of little rendition about saying how do I deserve you? You're the perfect girl, and I'm just a housewares employee. And she goes, that's why I deserve you, because I'm the perfect girl and you're just a housewares employee. It's very interesting. But there's a Shining musical. There's a couple of different Shining musicals out there, so it's definitely something that people have gravitated towards.
I dragged Anthony Yee, one of our podcasters, along to a amateur production of Carrie the musical.
Oh wow, nice.
He's not a fan of musicals, whereas I think a bit like you have a bit of a theatre kind of educational background, so I just loved it. It was great. But it just suited my tastes. But I thought that was kind of just literally just stumbled on that just then. And speaking of music, something that I hadn't touched on, which I probably should have done when we're going back to the original film, is that the score was composed by Richard Band, who also is quite closely associated with the band Features. The name says it. Who are the producers of the film. And he would also do music for From Beyond, which we will talk about as well. But the reason to kind of bring this to note is that the similarities of the score of this to Bernard Herrmann's score for Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is pretty obvious and
very on the nose.
Very on the nose. And I did like that. I think it kind of adds to the element of the piece.
Yes.
So especially that kind of, it's got that kind of 50s B movie kind of feel to it when it plays out in conjunction with this film.
Yeah, no, interestingly enough, I because it was a piece of music that has that beat behind it, which is very reminiscent of the 70s or the 80s, or not too sure when. But as a kid, I remember seeing Munchies, because it was one of those films that was sort of appropriate, I guess, age appropriate for me to see. that had those like, sort of monsters in the time with gremlins and critters and all that sort of stuff. So I remember seeing that, but the theme for that, I'm pretty sure at the introduction, is this theme, which is a director of the Psycho theme, with a jazzy 80s in the background. But you listen to them side by side and it's almost exact. And the composer apparently wanted to pay homage to it, or indirectly composed what he thought was a very similar piece of music that ended up being exact, which was obviously the Psycho theme.
Cool.
So, and obviously we're not talking about the whole because anyone who knows, obviously that wasn't the theme to Psycho. The Psycho theme was, all I can think of is the theme in the movie Clue, but it's very similar to this.
Yeah, I know what you're saying there. Yeah. Cool. Okay, I think on that note, we are kind of at a point where we could bow out of this one, other than to kind of quickly wrap up our thoughts. I often ask the question to my fellow podcasters I think we both really enjoyed the film. I think that's a kind of a given, and enjoyed that journey. So with that in mind, would you recommend it to a modern-going audience? And with that, does it stand the test of time? Is it still as good as it was from when it was released in the 80s?
Look, from my point of view, I think that yes, everyone should see this film, whether you like it or you don't like it. I don't know. Obviously, don't show your grandma it or anything. But it's definitely fun for a Halloween sort of thing. But as long as you know what you're going into. That being said, I do think that it being in its sort of the way it's been filmed, it captures something that is unique.
Yeah.
So whether or not it be a big budget the first time they've tried telling the story, obviously anytime you tell a story, it's going to have its own sort of kick to it. But the campiness to it, I'm on board for, because I'm a fan of camp. But
yes,
the stylistic choices with the lenses, the colors, the lights, the special effects, the gore sort of stuff with the stop motion animation and things like that.
Yeah.
It seems so pinnacleistic of the time. Same as in Puppet Master, you see it and you go, I know when this is Chucky and stuff like that. Child's Play. It's the nostalgia for that I've come to appreciate a lot more. And kind of when I go back to looking at films that have stuck in my head with a good or a bad memory, it's usually that what I appreciate about the film is knowing that it has aged, or maybe that I've aged with it, or something about that nostalgia is quite good. And especially with horror films, going back to them with the scares that we have now and the real world scares which we're experiencing every day, it is good to feel even slightly more distanced within it. And it's different to how we have the stage performances, and we have, which I hope will start up again. But the idea of having live performance as well being a different way just to tell a story, even with going back to that Greek telling of story in theatre, everyone's sort of along with the bargain of that. Even talking about musicals, I'm not a big fan of the musical Cats, purely because the story is so hard to stick with. But if you're a fan of dance, if you're a fan of music, and you're a fan of singing and stuff like that, and musicals in general, it's the live performance where everyone's suspension of disbelief is carried over into the performance, which is usually making it good. On that point, if there is a musical that I would recommend to someone who has maybe a struggle with that, it would be The Drowsy Chaperone, which is hilarious and very, very good. It's the writer, I saw a bootlegged copy of it from the Broadway production, which featured the narrator character who was the writer as well of the performance. He actually wrote the thing, but also played the narrator on stage. But it's a very nostalgic, old school, campy send up of very early musicals and that early style of when sound was being introduced, and so you had a lot of the sort of pointistic characters there. But it's fantastic there. And even with Evil Dead, the blood and gore, I think, go really, really well. And I would love to see some of those musicals like Evil Dead being done even on a short budget, a small budget, art house type film that could be done very much nowadays. Like even Hedwig and the Angry Inch was a small budget off-Broadway musical.
Yeah, that's right.
Which was fantastic. And
it's an awesome film.
Brilliant musical. Again, if you haven't seen that, you like Rocky Horror, see that.
Yeah, so highly recommend that too. I know we're kind of talking outside of horror, but it's an awesome film.
Yeah.
Cool.
But obviously, within that, primarily Re-Animator is the one I'm plugging there. And Bride of Re-Animator, I guess you'd say is attached onto that.
I think I would say I would recommend Bride as well. I would. It's a very different. It feels very different. Like I said, it feels a bit more like the Return of the Living Dead kind of franchise stuff to me.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because it's direct. Even Brian Usner, as I said, directed one of the installments of Return of the Living Dead. So it's got a very kind of similar feel to it, and it's so in that sense it steps away, as I said, from the original film, but it still is a good companion piece. Yeah.
Cool. No, absolutely. And even on top of that too, I was just going to say about Jeffrey Combs. I had no idea as well, but he had obviously at the starring roles. He was in Michael J. Fox's The Frighteners in 1996.
Love that movie.
Fantastic film. Exactly. Yeah. I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. He was in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was in The House on Haunted Hill. Now, this excited me the most because I loved that
Jeffrey Rush one, isn't it?
Yes, the one with Jeffrey Rush. Yeah. Again, a film that I think was really, really strong in the beginning and the middle, and then sort of like died off in the end.
Yeah.
But he plays the iconic doctor who appears on the camera when she lifts it up and sees the table, and I was just like, of course. And he's that character. But again, like I fell in love with that story because of its sort of backstory that was the fictitious story of the house. And
that's right. Yeah,
it's obviously a remake of the original. But again, yes, segues. So yes, he's done a lot of.
That was important to mention that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
but it would be great to see him, like doing something a little bit more, and giving the ability to sort of, I guess, utilize what he wants to play. I mean, so much of the original character of Herbert West in its pictorial form was formed from Jeffrey Combs. So it would be fascinating to have his take on it and to see what he would bring to a character if he was given a bit more control in the creative process of a film or a short or something like that.
Yeah. No, I'd love to like get his take on where, like I said, where he thinks West would be now and what he would bring to it. I think that would be really interesting to get his take on that. So if you do listen to this, Mr. Coombs, please let us know. And on that note, we should probably, once and for all bow out of the discussions on the Re-Animator franchise. Do stick around as we talk a few more discussions with Stuart Gordon's work, the late, great Stuart Gordon and what he did. The next one we will be talking about will be From Beyond, which does star Jeffrey Combs again, does star Barbara Crampton again as well. And is an equally fucked up but brilliant film. Discussing that one. Until then, I'm your host, Saul Muerte, and I was joined for this discussion on the podcast for Re-Animator by Richard Lovegrove.
My work.
Goodbye.
Very well. Until next time, viewers, good night.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.